With his heart pounding, Arthur raised his hand to knock on the door, the delivery box serving as his disguise. He expected to find a fragile woman, perhaps even angry. But when the door opened, the air left him. There stood Eliza, stronger than ever, and by her side, not one, but 3 children. 3 identical boys, with his eyes staring at him with innocent curiosity. In that instant, the weight of his decision from years ago hit him with the force of a hurricane, bringing him to his knees. Arthur Sterling watched Manhattan from his 47th floor office with the satisfied gaze of a man surveying his personal kingdom. At 29, he already served as vice president at Sterling Industries, the corporate empire his grandfather had founded and his father had expanded. His Harvard MBA diploma hung on the wall beside a black-and-white photograph of 3 generations of Sterling men, all sharing the same sapphire blue eyes that were considered the family's trademark. He adjusted his Patek Philippe watch, a gift from his father when he'd graduated, and returned his attention to the quarterly projections on his laptop. The merger with TechVision was nearly complete, and his father had hinted that Arthur's handling of this deal would determine how quickly he might ascend to the presidency. "Mr. Sterling?" His secretary's voice came through the intercom with an unusual hesitation. "There's a Miss Reynolds here to see you. Eliza Reynolds. She says you know her from Yale." Arthur frowned. He hadn't scheduled any meetings for this afternoon. And Eliza? The name brought back flashes of a slim brunette with intelligent eyes and a scholarship to prove it. Their on-again, off-again relationship had stretched across 3 years, convenient when he was between more appropriate socialite girlfriends. "Send her in," he said after a pause, not bothering to close his laptop or stand. Eliza Reynolds entered his office with tentative steps, clutching her worn handbag. She'd dressed carefully for this meeting in a simple pantsuit bought specifically to look appropriate in this environment. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she looked thinner than he remembered. "Arthur," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for seeing me." He barely glanced up, fingers still moving across the keyboard. "This is unexpected, Eliza. I'm rather busy with the TechVision merger. What brings you to Sterling Industries?" "We need to talk," she said, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her bag. Arthur finally paused his typing, leaning back in his chair with a practiced expression of polite interest. "I'm pregnant, Arthur. 2 months." The silence that followed was broken only by the tick-tock of the Cartier clock on the wall. Arthur's eyes, those famous sterling sapphires, slowly rose to meet hers, now cold as ice. "Are you certain it's mine?" he asked, his voice calculatedly controlled. Tears immediately welled in Eliza's eyes. "How can you ask that?" "You know there hasn't been anyone else." Arthur sighed, rising to pour himself a glass of whiskey from the crystal decanter on the credenza. He didn't offer her anything. "Inconvenient timing, Eliza," he said, swirling the amber liquid. "We're about to announce the TechVision merger. My father is evaluating me for the presidency in 2 years. An unplanned pregnancy with with someone outside our social circle isn't in the plans." "Our social circle?" she repeated, incredulous. "Arthur, we're talking about a child. Our child." "Be realistic," he said, adjusting his watch again. "What do you have to offer a child in my world? You're a Connecticut girl with no connections, no proper upbringing by my family's standards, no refinement. What could you possibly offer my child but mediocrity?" The words hit Eliza like slaps. She took a step back, steadying herself against a chair. Arthur continued, now seated at his desk again, already opening a drawer. "I'll resolve this for you. A discreet procedure, a private clinic. Afterward, perhaps a fresh start somewhere else. Chicago, maybe? I have contacts who could arrange something administrative for you there." Eliza remained motionless, watching the man she loved transform the news of his child into a corporate problem to be efficiently solved. "I won't have an abortion, Arthur." Something darkened in his gaze. "Then you'll have to handle this on your own. I can't compromise everything I've built for a one-night mistake." One-night mistake? We've been together for almost 3 years. Intermittently, he corrected with a cold smile. You've always been, how should I put it, a pleasant temporary distraction, Eliza, never something serious. Arthur filled out a check, tore it from the checkbook and slid it across the polished desk. This should cover any expenses. If you insist on having this child, do it far away from New York and my family. My lawyer will contact you about a confidentiality agreement. When Eliza refused to take the check, Arthur pressed a button on his phone. 2 security men in dark suits arrived within seconds, as if they'd been standing ready. Miss Reynolds is leaving, he instructed, turning his attention back to his laptop. In the lobby of the Paramount building, as snow began to fall over Manhattan, his final words echoed, "If it were someone on my level, Eliza, I might consider it. But you? It would be a generational mistake to perpetuate this union." The first months were brutal. Pregnant and without close family support in New York, Eliza slept on the tiny sofa in her friend Rebecca's Brooklyn apartment. She rose at 4:30 each morning to catch the subway to Manhattan, where she worked as a breakfast waitress at a Times Square hotel. In the afternoon, she worked another shift at a restaurant in Midtown, arriving home around midnight. Her savings evaporated with medical appointments. At her first ultrasound, the surprise, it wasn't 1 baby, but 3, identical triplets. The doctor, noting her desperation, reduced the consultation to half price. Between shifts, Eliza studied programming from books borrowed from the public library. It had been her field at college before she dropped out of her final year at Yale to help her ailing mother. Technology was her refuge when everything else crumbled. In her 6th month of pregnancy, she was fired from the restaurant. Her enormous belly frightened the customers, the manager said. Without options, she began doing freelance website design work, using the public library's computer. On a snowy February morning, Eliza stood in line at a food bank, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The elderly volunteer handing out bags noticed her condition. "First baby, dear?" she asked kindly. "Triplets," Eliza answered quietly. The woman's eyes widened. "And the father?" "There is no father," Eliza said, straightening her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "Just me." Later that night, huddled under a thin blanket on Rebecca's sofa, Eliza calculated her dwindling finances. At this rate, she couldn't afford even the cheapest apartment after the babies came. The check Arthur had tried to give her would have covered 6 months' rent, but taking it would have meant accepting his dismissal of their children as a mistake. "We're not a mistake," she whispered to her belly, feeling the triplets move beneath her palm. "And I'll spend my life proving it." By her 8th month, Eliza's ankles were swollen beyond recognition, and standing for 8-hour shifts became impossible. When the breakfast manager suggested she take leave until after the birth, her last steady income disappeared. The labor came at 8 months. Alone in the waiting room of the Brooklyn Public Hospital, Eliza made a promise to the children she hadn't yet met. "I'll show him that we're more than he ever imagined. One day, the world will know it." Christopher Alexander and William Reynolds were born on a May night, 3 identical miniatures with the same sapphire blue eyes of the father who had rejected them. While the nurses cleaned and weighed the babies, the attending doctor approached Eliza's bed. "They're healthy, despite being slightly premature. Perfect little boys." He hesitated. "Will the father be coming?" Eliza looked toward the window, where the lights of Manhattan glittered across the river, including the illuminated spire of the building where Arthur Sterling was probably working late, unaware that his sons had just entered the world. "No," she said quietly, "but that's okay. We're going to be extraordinary without him." As the snow melted on her cheap coat, Eliza couldn't imagine that 15 years later she would return to that same building, not as a supplicant, but as the owner. The 3 tiny faces in the hospital nursery looked impossibly small, their features barely formed yet unmistakably identical. Eliza Reynolds pressed her palm against the glass, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but but from a fierce, protective love that surged through her exhausted body. "Christopher, Alexander, and William Reynolds," she whispered, tasting their names on her lips. 4 days later, Eliza stepped carefully into Rebecca's cramped Brooklyn apartment, balancing William in her arms while a nurse from the hospital charity program carried Christopher and Alexander. The living room had been hastily rearranged to accommodate 3 second-hand bassinets crammed next to the worn sofa that would serve as Eliza's bed. "It's not much," Rebecca apologized, a graphic designer whose own financial struggles made her generosity all the more remarkable. "It's everything," Eliza replied, her voice thick with gratitude. That night, as her friend slept in the apartment's only bedroom, Eliza lay awake on the lumpy sofa, listening to the symphony of tiny breaths. Sleep wasn't an option, not with 3 newborns needing feeding every 2 hours. Her C-section incision throbbed, but painkillers were a luxury she couldn't afford. When the alarm on her phone buzzed at 4:30 a.m., Eliza carefully extracted herself from between Alexander and William, who had finally settled against her chest. She placed them gently in their bassinets, wincing as her stitches pulled. "I'll be back by 3, she whispered to Rebecca, who had agreed to watch the babies during Eliza's morning shift. The breast milk is labeled in the refrigerator. The subway at 5 a.m. was a world of half-asleep service workers, cleaners, kitchen staff, security guards. Eliza leaned against the pole, her uniform for the Times Square Hotel breakfast service pressed but visibly worn at the cuffs. Her breasts ached, already filling again with milk she'd need to pump in the staff bathroom during her break. "You're back already?" her supervisor asked, eyebrows raised as Eliza tied her apron. "Didn't you just have babies last week?" "Triplets," Eliza corrected, reaching for her order pad. "And rent doesn't pay itself." By 10 a.m., her feet were swollen inside her sensible black shoes. She served Belgian waffles to businessmen who reminded her of Arthur, their crisp suits and casual entitlement as they discussed million-dollar deals without making eye contact with her. She poured coffee for families on vacation, the fathers cradling their babies while mothers ate uninterrupted, a luxury Eliza couldn't imagine. During her 15-minute break, she sat on a toilet in the staff bathroom, attaching the manual breast pump she'd bought second-hand. The mechanical sound echoed against the tile walls as she closed her eyes, imagining her sons' faces. 3 weeks into this punishing routine, Eliza sat across from Dr. Patel in a community clinic in Brooklyn, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "Ms. Reynolds, your incision is showing signs of infection," the doctor said gently. "You need rest. Are you lifting heavy things?" Eliza thought about carrying 3 babies up 3 flights of stairs, about standing for 8-hour shifts, about the second job she'd started at a midtown restaurant. "I don't have a choice," she answered simply. Dr. Patel's eyes softened. "The triplets' father is not in the picture," Eliza finished firmly. The doctor sighed, writing a prescription for antibiotics she knew would strain her patient's budget. "Come back in a week, and please, try to rest." Rest remained elusive. By 6 weeks postpartum, Eliza had developed a military precision routine. Wake at 4:30, pump breast milk, leave labeled bottles for Rebecca or the teenage neighbor who watched the babies for a small fee, work breakfast shift, rush to the midtown restaurant for the lunch service, hurry home to feed the babies, do freelance data entry until midnight, sleep for 4 broken hours, repeat. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, during her second job lunch shift, Eliza balanced 4 plates along her arm while navigating between tables at the busy restaurant. A familiar voice made her freeze. Sterling Industries' acquisition of TechVision is the talk of Wall Street. Arthur Sterling sat at a corner table with 3 other men in expensive suits, champagne glasses glinting before them. He hadn't seen her. For a moment, Eliza stood paralyzed, taking in his perfectly tailored suit, his confident gestures, his life continuing uninterrupted while hers had been completely transformed. The plates felt suddenly heavy. One slipped, then another, crashing to the floor in a spectacular shower of pasta and ceramic. Every head turned, including Arthur's, their eyes locked for one electric moment. Recognition flickered across his face, followed immediately by discomfort. He looked away first, turning back to his companions, deliberately ignoring the woman who was scrambling to clean up broken dishes while the manager berated her. That night, Eliza sat on the floor of Rebecca's bathroom, sobbing silently into a towel after the babies were finally asleep. It was the first time she'd allowed herself to break down since the hospital. "I can't do this," she whispered to her reflection in the cracked mirror. "I'm not strong enough." From the living room came the soft sound of Christopher stirring, then the distinctive whimper that preceded his hungry cry. Eliza wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders, and went to him. Strength wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. At her 5-month checkup, the ultrasound technician squinted at the screen. "I'm seeing 3 distinct heartbeats," she said, her voice confused. "Did you know you're carrying triplets?" Eliza's world tilted. "That's impossible," she whispered, though of course it wasn't. Multiples weren't uncommon in her mother's family. "I'll get the doctor," the technician said, clearly concerned about Eliza's pallor. Dr. Patel confirmed the diagnosis, his kind eyes watching Eliza carefully. "This significantly changes your prenatal care needs. You'll require more frequent monitoring, possibly bed rest in the later months." "I can't afford to stop working," Eliza said numbly. "I can barely afford this appointment." Understanding crossed the doctor's face. He made a note in her chart. "I'm reducing today's fee by half, and I'll refer you to some support programs for multiple births." Between shifts that week, Eliza began visiting the New York Public Library, checking out books on coding and web development, skills she'd started learning at Yale before dropping out to care for her sick mother. While her babies grew inside her, she dedicated herself to growing knowledge that might offer them a better future. In her 6th month, with her pregnancy impossible to hide, the restaurant manager called Eliza into his office. "I'm sorry, Eliza, but your condition is disturbing to some customers," he said, avoiding her eyes. "We need to let you go." Jobless and with her belly now prominently displaying the triplets, Eliza turned to the only option left, using the public library's computers to design simple websites for small businesses, charging fees so modest it barely covered subway fare. In the evenings, she hunched over library keyboards, ignoring backaches and swollen ankles, teaching herself JavaScript and PHP while the babies kicked inside her, as if encouraging her efforts. Rebecca found her one night, asleep at the kitchen table, head resting on programming books, a half-eaten package of crackers beside her, the only food she could afford that week. "This can't continue," her friend insisted. "Call him. Make him take responsibility." "Never," Eliza said with sudden fierceness. "We don't need his money or his pity. I'll find a way." When her water broke at 32 weeks, Eliza was alone in the apartment. Rebecca was working a night shift, and pain ripped through her with unexpected intensity. She called a taxi, but when the driver saw her condition, he refused to risk his upholstery. Determination pushing through fear, she made her way to the subway station, stopping every few minutes as contractions seized her body. Fellow passengers created space around the obviously laboring woman, a few offering concerned assistance. Hours later, in the harsh fluorescent light of the Brooklyn Public Hospital waiting room, Eliza sat alone, both hands cradling her contracting belly. Around her, other expectant mothers were surrounded by partners, parents, friends. Her solitude was a physical presence, as real as the pain radiating through her body. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Is someone coming to be with you, honey?" Eliza shook her head, a resolve hardening within her like steel being tempered in fire. "It's just us," she said, looking down at her belly. Then, with a voice that surprised even herself with its strength, she added, "We're going to show him that we are more than he ever imagined." One day the world will know it." While the nurses wheeled her toward delivery, Eliza couldn't have known that the three tiny beings fighting to enter the world would become, alongside her, symbols of a success that Arthur Sterling could never purchase with his inherited name or fortune. Christopher, Alexander, and William Reynolds were born on a May night, three identical miniatures with the same sapphire blue eyes of the father who had rejected them. The maternity ward's fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow over the three newborns as the nurse placed them one by one in Eliza's trembling arms. Exhausted from 27 hours of labor, her body still numb from the emergency C-section, she stared in wonder at the identical faces, their delicate features a perfect blend of her and Arthur. "They're beautiful," she whispered, her finger tracing the curve of Christopher's cheek. Each baby had the unmistakable sterling sapphire blue eyes, a genetic signature that would follow them through life. The discharge from Brooklyn Methodist Hospital came too soon, 3 days after delivery, with a folder of instructions, samples of formula, and a social worker's card. Rebecca waited outside with a borrowed minivan, her face a mix of concern and excitement. "Welcome home," Rebecca said softly as she helped Eliza navigate 3 infant carriers up the narrow stairwell to her apartment. The living room had been transformed. A donated changing table stood against one wall, 3 second-hand cribs occupied what had been the dining area, and Rebecca's sofa now had sheets and a pillow, converted into Eliza's bed. "It's not much," Eliza said, surveying the cramped quarters. Rebecca squeezed her hand. "It's a beginning." Those first weeks passed in a blur of sleeplessness and constant motion. Eliza tracked feeding schedules in a worn notebook, William at midnight, Christopher at 12:30, Alexander at 1, then repeat at 3 a.m. Between feedings came diaper changes, laundry hung on a makeshift line in the bathroom, and desperate attempts to shower while all 3 babies miraculously slept. When the boys were 6 weeks old, Eliza set up her ancient laptop on the kitchen counter, William strapped to her chest in a second-hand carrier, the other 2 asleep in their cribs. The freelance job was simple, data entry for a local accounting firm, but it paid $15 an hour, money they desperately needed. "We'll make this work," she whispered to William, his tiny head tucked under her chin as she typed one-handed, pausing occasionally to soothe Christopher, who fussed in his sleep. By the time the triplets were 4 months old, Eliza had developed a rhythm to their chaos. She'd sleep from 9 p.m. to midnight, then work through the night's feedings, alternating between coding and cradling babies. Dawn would find her bleary-eyed but determined, 3 fed and changed infants arranged on a playmat while she continued working. One morning, as weak winter sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, Eliza noticed Christopher staring intently at a mobile Rebecca had crafted from colorful paper shapes. His tiny hands reached up, not randomly but with purpose, following the geometric patterns. "You like patterns, don't you?" Eliza said, smiling at her son. Next to him, Alexander responded to a children's song playing softly on the radio, his legs kicking in perfect rhythm, while William studied his own hands with remarkable focus. When their first birthday approached, Eliza saved enough from her growing roster of freelance clients to rent a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. The bedroom would be for the boys. The living room would be hers. "It's not much space," the landlord warned as she signed the lease, eyeing the 3 identical toddlers clinging to her legs. "It's ours," Eliza replied simply, feeling a surge of pride as she accepted the keys. Moving day coincided with the triplets' first steps, 3 wobbly boys taking tentative steps across the empty living room of their new home, falling and laughing in such perfect synchronicity that Eliza grabbed her cracked phone to record the moment. She would later watch this video countless times during late-night coding sessions, reminding herself why every sacrifice was worth it. As the boys approached 18 months, their distinct personalities emerged from their identical appearances. Christopher, the analytical observer, would sit for hours arranging blocks by color and size. Alexander hummed constantly, creating melodies that were surprisingly complex. William, the pragmatic problem solver, figured out how to unlock child-proof cabinets before his brothers, then taught them his technique. What stunned Eliza most was their rapid language development. While most toddlers their age managed a handful of words, her sons spoke in simple sentences, absorbing vocabulary with extraordinary speed. "Mama code?" William would ask, climbing onto her lap as she worked late at night, his tiny finger pointing at her laptop screen. "Yes, Mama's coding," she would answer, explaining simple concepts that he seemed to grasp instantly. One evening, while bathing the boys, Eliza caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her once vibrant hair hung limp, and her clothes, cheap practical items from thrift stores, hung loosely on her frame. For a moment, Arthur's cruel words echoed, "You have nothing to offer a child in my world." Alexander splashed water, drawing her attention back to 3 giggling toddlers with soapy hair and bright eyes exactly like their father's. "We're proving him wrong every day," she whispered to her reflection. By their second birthday, Eliza had established a modest client base for her web development work. Between nursery rhymes and toddler meals, she built e-commerce sites for small businesses, working through nap time and long into the night. The payments weren't large, but they were steady, allowing her to enroll the boys in a subsidized preschool program 3 mornings a week. Those precious 15 hours became her dedicated work time, fueled by coffee and determination. In a corner of the local library, she taught herself advanced programming languages, absorbed coding tutorials, and began experimenting with algorithms that could predict patterns in data sets. "You look exhausted," commented the librarian who had come to know her. "Your little one's keeping you busy?" "They're worth every sleepless night," Eliza replied, gathering her notes. "They're extraordinary." And they were. At 2.5, Christopher could complete complex puzzles designed for children twice his age. Alexander sang perfect pitch, recreating melodies after hearing them once. William organized his toys in elaborate systems that revealed an intuitive understanding of mathematical principles. Their 3rd birthday arrived with a small celebration in the park, a homemade cake with 3 candles, a few balloons, and a handful of friends from preschool. As the boys blew out their candles together, Eliza presented them with a framed drawing. "What's this, Mama?" Christopher asked, studying the geometric design. "It's a logo," Eliza explained, "for our company, Triplicity Tech." The boys examined the intertwined T's with solemn fascination. "Our company?" William asked, his blue eyes, so like Arthur's, wide with curiosity. "Yes," Eliza said, her voice firm with newfound confidence. "I've been working on something special, an algorithm that can predict patterns in financial markets. And tonight, I'm meeting someone who might help us turn it into a real business." That evening, after tucking 3 exhausted birthday boys into bed, Eliza changed into her best outfit, a second-hand blazer and skirt she'd altered herself, and applied a touch of lipstick. On her laptop was the completed algorithm, the culmination of thousands of stolen hours and relentless determination. "Sleep tight, my brilliant boys," she whispered, kissing each identical forehead. "Tomorrow might be the beginning of something amazing." As she looked at her sons sleeping peacefully in their shared bedroom, their matching blue eyes closed in dreamless slumber, Eliza couldn't yet know that her algorithm created between diapers and bedtime stories would become the foundation of a technological revolution that would make the biggest banks on Wall Street, including those Arthur frequented, beg for her attention. The morning sunshine filtered through the grimy windows of the Bronx apartment as Eliza stared at her laptop screen, reviewing her presentation for the 10th time. Outside, the city was already humming with activity, but inside, an unusual stillness prevailed. The triplets were spending the morning with Rebecca, giving Eliza precious hours to prepare for the meeting that could change everything. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened her only decent blouse, a navy cotton piece she'd found at a thrift store and carefully tailored to fit her slender frame. The meeting with Professor James Whittaker, her former mentor from Yale, represented a desperate gamble. For weeks, she had tracked him down through academic networks, finally securing this coffee meeting through a carefully crafted email that highlighted her algorithmic breakthrough rather than her personal circumstances. The small cafe near Columbia University was crowded when Eliza arrived 15 minutes early. She claimed a corner table, spreading her notes and preparing her ancient laptop. Every few seconds, she glanced at the door, rehearsing her opening lines under her breath. When Professor Whittaker entered, she almost didn't recognize him. His once dark hair had gone completely silver, but his keen eyes remained unchanged, observant and penetrating. He spotted her immediately. "Eliza Reynolds!" he exclaimed, genuine warmth in his voice as he approached. "One of the brightest minds to ever grace my classroom." Eliza rose, accepting his handshake with a mixture of gratitude and nervousness. "Thank you for meeting me, Professor." "James, please," he corrected, settling into the chair opposite her. "I was intrigued by your email. You mentioned a predictive algorithm for market patterns." Without preamble, Eliza launched into her explanation, grabbing paper napkins to sketch diagrams when her laptop proved too slow to load her presentation. As she spoke, drawing complex flowcharts on the flimsy paper, Whittaker's expression transformed from polite interest to genuine fascination. "This is remarkable," he interrupted, studying her napkin sketches. "You've identified correlations that established firms have missed entirely." He looked up, curiosity evident. "Where are you working now? Goldman? Morgan Stanley?" Eliza hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. From her bag, she withdrew a small photo. "I'm working from home, actually, while raising them." Whittaker stared at the photograph of 3 identical boys with startling blue eyes. Understanding dawned on his face. "Triplets? You developed this algorithm while raising triplets alone?" "Yes," Eliza said simply. "They're 3 years old now." Something in Whittaker's expression shifted. He studied her face more carefully, noting the exhaustion beneath her composed exterior. "The father?" "Not involved," she replied, her tone making it clear the subject was closed. Whittaker nodded slowly, connecting unsaid dots. "Your brilliance was always obvious, Eliza. But this," he tapped the napkin diagrams, "combined with raising 3 children alone, that demonstrates extraordinary determination." He leaned forward. "Tell me what you need." Eliza straightened her shoulders. "I'm not looking for charity, Professor. I'm offering a genuine investment opportunity. $250,000 for a 15% stake in Triplicity Tech." The company name felt strange on her tongue, a dream spoken into reality. "Triplicity," he repeated, smiling at the wordplay. "Clever." 3 hours later, after intense discussion and a thorough examination of her algorithm, Whittaker pulled out his checkbook. Eliza's hands trembled as she accepted the check, the seed capital that would transform her kitchen table operation into a legitimate business. "I believe in your vision," Whittaker said. "And I believe in you." 2 weeks later, Eliza signed the lease on a small office space in the Flatiron district, fighting back tears as the realtor handed her the keys. The space was modest, 1 main room with 2 small side offices, but it represented something monumental: legitimacy. The weekend before officially opening, Eliza brought the boys to see their new company headquarters. The empty space echoed with their excited voices as they ran from corner to corner. "Can we paint the logo, Mama?" Christopher asked, pointing to the blank wall behind what would become the reception area. Eliza nodded, opening a bag to reveal small paintbrushes and carefully mixed colors. Together, the 4 of them painted the Triplicity Tech logo, 3 intertwined T's forming a triangle, on the wall, their laughter filling the empty space with promise. The following Monday, Eliza conducted her first interviews. She had posted job listings for 2 programming positions, specifically seeking talented women who had been overlooked by larger firms. From 27 applicants, Two stood out immediately. Mei Chen, a recent MIT graduate whose brilliant thesis had been largely ignored because of her quiet demeanor, arrived precisely on time, her resume impeccable. "Your algorithm framework is revolutionary," she told Eliza during the interview. "I've been developing similar concepts, but you've solved integration problems I've been struggling with for months." The second candidate, Zoe Washington, was self-taught, having faced discrimination at every turn. "No formal education after high school," she explained unapologetically. "But I've built systems for clients that outperform anything their previous Ivy League developers created." By the end of the day, Eliza had hired both women, offering modest salaries supplemented with equity, creating not just employees, but partners in her vision. The first month of Triplicity Tech's official existence passed in a blur of activity. Eliza managed to secure the boys a spot at a subsidized preschool program for gifted children in Queens, allowing her to work while they received education tailored to their advanced abilities. Each afternoon, she would pick them up and bring them to the office, where a small corner had been outfitted with books and educational toys. "Mama, I fixed your equation," William announced one afternoon, pointing to a whiteboard where Eliza had been working through a problem. At just 3 years old, he had identified a mathematical error that had been frustrating her for hours. The first client meeting nearly ended before it began. When Eliza entered the conference room of Meridian Bank, the 3 male executives looked past her, one checking his watch impatiently. "Will the CEO be joining us soon?" one asked dismissively. "I am the CEO," Eliza replied calmly, opening her laptop. "Shall we begin?" Their skepticism was palpable until she demonstrated the algorithm's capabilities, predicting market fluctuations with 87% accuracy using historical data. The room fell silent, their expressions transforming from condescension to stunned interest. 6 months after opening their doors, Triplicity secured their breakthrough, a meeting with JP Morgan representatives interested in licensing their technology. The potential deal would value their algorithm at $28 million, a figure that seemed unreal to Eliza. The evening before the JP Morgan presentation, Eliza received a call from the boys' school requesting a parent-teacher conference. Her stomach tightened with worry as she entered the classroom the next morning, expecting problems. Instead, Mrs. Abernathy greeted her with undisguised amazement. "Mrs. Reynolds, I've been teaching gifted children for 23 years and I've never encountered abilities like your sons possess." She showed Eliza their recent work, Christopher's detailed drawings of celestial bodies with surprisingly accurate descriptions, Alexander's musical notations that demonstrated understanding well beyond his years, and William's mathematical solutions that sometimes made even Mrs. Abernathy consult reference books. "They're operating academically at a level typically seen in children 3 to 4 years older," she explained. "Their capabilities are truly extraordinary." That night, Eliza ordered pizza, a rare treat, to celebrate both the teacher's assessment and the pending JP Morgan meeting. As the boys happily devoured their slices, she explained in simple terms that their business was growing. "Does that mean we can have a bigger house?" Alexander asked, sauce decorating his chin. "Maybe soon," Eliza promised, her heart full as she looked at her sons. "Very soon." While the boys slept in their new rooms, Eliza didn't know that the small business seed she had planted would become, in just a few years, the kind of empire that would make Arthur Sterling question every word of contempt he had uttered in that Manhattan office. While the boys slept in their new rooms, Eliza sat at her desk, staring at the contract that would transform their lives. The JP Morgan licensing deal, $28 million for exclusive use of the Triplicity algorithm in their investment banking division, represented validation beyond anything she had dared to dream. "Ms. Reynolds?" Her lawyer's voice came through the speakerphone. "Are you ready to sign tomorrow?" "Yes," she answered, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. 3 years ago, I couldn't afford diapers. Tomorrow, I'm licensing technology to JP Morgan." After ending the call, Eliza allowed herself a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. She walked to the boys' bedroom, watching their peaceful sleep. 3 identical faces with those unmistakable sterling sapphire eyes. "We did it," she whispered. The next morning in J.P. Morgan's imposing headquarters, Eliza maintained perfect composure as she signed each page of the licensing agreement. Only when she stepped into the taxi afterward did she permit tears to fall, silent tears of triumph and vindication. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Triplicity Tech," she replied. "In the Flatiron District." When she entered the office, her small team erupted in applause. May and Zoe, now joined by 7 other developers, had decorated the space with streamers and champagne weighted in plastic cups. "To Eliza," May toasted, "who created a revolutionary algorithm while raising triplets and surviving on 4 hours of sleep." Later that afternoon, Eliza led her first strategy meeting as the CEO of a company suddenly flush with capital. The conference room, a significant upgrade from their previous folding table, held her executive team. May as Chief Technology Officer, Zoe as Head of Development, and Professor Whitaker as Chief Financial Advisor. "We're reinvesting 90% of the licensing fee," Eliza announced, standing confidently at the head of the table. "I want an office in Silicon Valley within 6 months. We'll target the top talent overlooked by Google and Facebook. Women, minorities, parents returning to work. We can't match their salaries," Zoe pointed out. Eliza smiled. "We'll offer something more valuable, equity and purpose. Every employee becomes a stakeholder in our success." 3 months later, Eliza signed the lease on an entire floor in a sleek Manhattan office building. The Triplicity logo, now rendered in polished steel, greeted visitors in the reception area. The staff had grown to 23, each carefully selected not just for technical brilliance but for alignment with Eliza's vision of inclusive excellence. The boys, now 5 years old, were thriving at Westwood Academy, a private school known for its advanced curriculum. Christopher's fascination with astronomy had evolved into a sophisticated understanding of astrophysics that bewildered his teachers. Alexander's musical talent had earned him private lessons with a Juilliard instructor who declared him a once-in-a-generation prodigy. William's mathematical abilities had advanced to university-level concepts, his mind processing complex equations with effortless grace. On a crisp autumn morning, Eliza toured a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, the realtor chattering about original moldings and hardwood floors. The triplets raced from room to room, claiming spaces and imagining possibilities. "It's perfect," she told the realtor, writing a check for the deposit without hesitation. That evening, as they ate takeout dinner on the floor of their soon-to-be home, the boys bubbling with excitement about their new rooms, Eliza felt a contentment she'd never imagined possible 3 years earlier. The Triplicity Foundation launched 6 months after the J.P. Morgan deal, with an initial endowment of $5 million dedicated to supporting single mothers in technology. At the foundation's first gala, Eliza stood at the podium, surveying the room filled with beneficiaries, supporters, and media. "When I found myself alone with 3 newborns, the world told me to aim lower, to accept limitations," she said, her voice strong. "Instead, I aimed higher, not despite my children, but because of them." The Triplicity Foundation exists to tell other mothers, your circumstances don't define your potential. As the foundation grew, so did Triplicity Tech's reputation. Fortune magazine requested an interview for their Next Big Thing in Tech issue. The photographer captured Eliza in a tailored suit, a far cry from the second-hand clothes of her waitressing days, standing confidently among her team. "Ms. Reynolds, your rise has been meteoric," the journalist observed. "What's your secret?" Eliza considered the question. "Necessity breeds innovation. When failure isn't an option, you find solutions others might miss." The Fortune profile, published with the headline, "The Prediction Queen: How Eliza Reynolds is Revolutionizing Financial Technology," carefully omitted any mention of her personal struggles or the triplets' father. Eliza had insisted on keeping the focus strictly professional. her achievements standing on their own merit. As the boys approached their 8th birthday, their distinct talents became increasingly apparent. Christopher was invited to observe at Princeton's astrophysics department after sending a letter to a leading professor with surprisingly insightful questions about black hole theory. Alexander performed his first original composition at a school concert, moving audience members to tears with music that seemed impossible from someone so young. William won his first citywide mathematics competition against students twice his age, solving problems that challenged even the judges. One evening, as Eliza helped Christopher with a science project in their Brooklyn Heights home, he asked the question she had been anticipating for years. "Mom, why don't we have a dad at school presentations like other kids?" Eliza set down the model planet they were painting. Alexander and William, sensing the importance of the moment, looked up from their own activities. "Your father," she began carefully, "chose not to be part of our lives. That was his decision, and it doesn't define who you are or who you'll become." "Is he dead?" Alexander asked, his sensitive nature evident in his worried expression. "No," Eliza answered truthfully. "He's alive. He simply made different choices." William, ever practical, asked, "Does he know about us? About what we can do?" "I don't think so," Eliza replied. "But that's okay. We've built something extraordinary together, just the 4 of us." That night, after tucking the boys into bed, Eliza noticed a newspaper left by her assistant on the kitchen counter. The business section featured a photograph of Arthur Sterling taking over as president of Sterling Industries following his father's retirement. His acceptance speech, quoted in the article, was filled with platitudes about family tradition and sterling excellence. The following morning, May showed Eliza the market analysis generated by their algorithm. "Sterling Industries has lost 12% of value since he took over," she noted. "Your algorithm predicted this decline 6 months ago based on their innovation stagnation and over-leveraging." Eliza studied the graph dispassionately. "Interesting," she said, though her heart beat faster at this tangible evidence of Arthur's failings. Later that day, Eliza stood in the private bathroom of her executive suite, studying her reflection. The frightened, exhausted young woman who had once waited tables with swollen ankles had vanished. In her place stood a confident, powerful CEO whose company valuation had reached $900 million. A transformation so complete, it seemed almost magical. The quarterly board meeting that afternoon brought unanimous approval for Eliza's proposal to prepare for an initial public offering within 18 months. "Our current valuation is $900 million, the chief financial officer reported. "With our growth trajectory, we could reasonably expect to exceed $2 billion at IPO." As Eliza reviewed the financial reports of the company she had built from nothing, she didn't realize that her path and Arthur Sterling's were destined to cross again. No longer as the powerful heir and the dispensable young woman, but as CEO to CEO on a much more public stage than either could have imagined. As Eliza reviewed the financial reports of the company she had built from nothing, a notification flashed on her phone screen. The Nasdaq closing bell had just rung, and Triplicity Tech's stock had surged another 3%, pushing their market capitalization past the $4 billion mark. She allowed herself a small smile before returning to the quarterly projections. 4 years had transformed Triplicity from a promising startup to a technological juggernaut. The company's initial public offering had been the talk of Wall Street, opening at $900 million and climbing to $2 billion by the end of the first trading day. Financial analysts, who had initially dismissed Eliza's company as overvalued, now scrambled to explain its meteoric rise to their clients. Eliza closed the financial report and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 38th floor. Manhattan spread before her, the same skyline that Arthur Sterling had once surveyed with such entitled confidence. Now she commanded a similar view, not through inheritance but through sheer determination and brilliance. Her intercom buzzed. "Ms. Reynolds, your car is waiting. The boys' recital begins in 45 minutes." "Thank you, Claire," she replied, gathering her things. The elevator descended to the lobby where her driver waited beside a sleek black Tesla. The Triplicity Tower, purchased outright the previous year, gleamed with architectural elegance, its facade of glass and steel a physical manifestation of the company's transparent yet revolutionary approach to technology. Across town, Alexander prepared backstage for his debut as a guest soloist with the Young Artists Symphony. At 12 years old, his musical genius had earned him recognition that even seasoned Juilliard professors found remarkable. "Mom," he called when he spotted Eliza slipping into the green room. "You made it." "I wouldn't miss it for anything," she replied, straightening his bow tie. "Where are your brothers?" Christopher's explaining quantum entanglement to the conductor, and William's probably calculating the acoustic properties of the concert hall. Eliza laughed, recognizing the accuracy of his assessment. The triplets, though identical in appearance, had developed into distinct individuals with extraordinary talents. Christopher's scientific mind operated on a level that had Princeton professors inviting him to observe their research. William's mathematical abilities had already earned him a gold medal at the International Mathematics Olympiad, making him the youngest champion in the competition's history. After the concert, where Alexander's performance drew a standing ovation, the family returned to their Soho penthouse, a far cry from the cramped Bronx apartment of their early years. The three-story residence featured a music room with perfect acoustics for Alexander, an observatory dome for Christopher, and a state-of-the-art computing lab for William. The following morning, Eliza sat for a photo shoot with Forbes magazine. The photographer posed her in the Triplicity boardroom, the Manhattan skyline visible through the windows behind her. The triplets joined for several shots, their matching navy suits and startling blue eyes creating a powerful visual. "The Prediction Queen and Her Prodigies," the editor announced, revealing the planned headline. "Eliza Reynolds has built a data empire valued at $4.7 billion while raising 3 extraordinary sons. This is the definition of having it all." Eliza's smile remained in place, though the phrase made her wince internally. Having it all had never been the goal. Survival had been, then success, then creating a legacy her sons could be proud of. Later that week, Christopher stood on stage at a scientific symposium presenting his theories about black hole dynamics to an audience of distinguished physicists. At 12 years old, his confidence and depth of knowledge left the audience murmuring in appreciation. "Your son is remarkable," a Nobel laureate told Eliza afterward. "His understanding of theoretical physics surpasses many of my doctoral students." 2 days later, William accepted his gold medal at the International Mathematics Olympiad. His solution to a problem that had stumped competitors twice his age was described by judges as elegant in its simplicity, revolutionary in its approach. Between these triumphs, Eliza continued expanding Triplicity's reach. The company's predictive algorithms had revolutionized not just financial markets but were being adapted for healthcare, climate science, and urban planning. Tech giants like Google had made acquisition offers ranging from $5 to $7 billion, all of which Eliza firmly declined. "I didn't build Triplicity to sell it," she explained to her board. "I built it to change how the world processes information and to create something lasting for my sons." One evening, as Eliza reviewed acquisition proposals in their penthouse living room, William discovered a business magazine left by their housekeeper. Arthur Sterling's face stared from the cover, accompanying an article titled "Sterling Industries Dynasty in Decline." "Mom," William called, holding up the magazine, "this man looks like us." Eliza froze, watching as Christopher and Alexander gathered around the magazine. The resemblance was undeniable. The same sapphire blue eyes, the same jawline, even similar expressions of intensity. "Is this—" Christopher began, his analytical mind quickly connecting dots. Eliza took a deep breath. "Yes, that's Arthur Sterling. He's your biological father." A heavy silence filled the room as the boys studied the photograph more carefully. His company's stock has dropped 47% in the last 18 months, William observed, ever practical even in emotional moments. Poor management decisions and failure to innovate, according to this article. Alexander, the most emotionally perceptive of the three, asked quietly, "Did he leave because of us?" Eliza moved to the sofa, gathering her sons close. "He left because he couldn't see value in what didn't fit his narrow worldview. That reflects his character, not your worth." "Has he ever tried to contact us?" Christopher asked. "No," Eliza answered honestly. "He chose a different path." The boys processed this information with remarkable maturity, asking thoughtful questions about their genetic heritage while expressing gratitude for the life they'd built without Arthur's presence. The next morning, Eliza's assistant delivered an elegant cream envelope to her desk. This just arrived by courier, Ms. Reynolds. Inside was an invitation to the Metropolitan Gala of Beneficence, one of New York's most prestigious annual events. A handwritten note at the bottom read, "The Business Council of New York is honored to present Eliza Reynolds with this year's Entrepreneur of the Year award." Eliza traced her fingers over the embossed lettering, remembering a time when such elite circles would have been unimaginable for a pregnant waitress from Connecticut. Now she would enter as an honored guest, accompanied by her extraordinary sons. That evening, as she helped the boys select tuxedos for the event, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Sterling Industries faces SEC investigation amid allegations of financial impropriety. She dismissed the notification without comment, focusing instead on Alexander's debate between bow tie styles. Whatever challenges Arthur faced were his own creation, just as her success was hers. As she adjusted William's cufflinks, Eliza had no idea that the Metropolitan Museum of Art would become the stage for the confrontation she had secretly awaited for 15 years. A reunion where every cruel word spoken on that winter afternoon would return with the weight of its own irony. As she adjusted William's cufflinks, Eliza's phone buzzed with a news alert about Sterling Industries. She ignored it, focusing instead on preparing her sons for the Metropolitan Gala. The notification, however, was merely the first ripple of what would soon become a tidal wave crashing through the carefully constructed boundaries of her life. The following morning, Eliza sat in her corner office reviewing the final preparations for the gala. Claire, her executive assistant, entered with the day's schedule and a sealed envelope. "The full guest list for the Metropolitan Gala arrived as you requested," Claire said, placing the envelope on Eliza's desk. "And Ms. Chen would like 5 minutes to discuss the Department of Defense contract amendments." Eliza nodded absently, her fingers already breaking the seal on the envelope. She scanned the alphabetically arranged names, her breath catching when she reached the S section. There it was, printed in elegant serif font. Arthur Sterling, Sterling Industries. The room seemed to tilt slightly. 15 years of carefully constructed distance collapsed in an instant. Eliza had known this moment might come eventually. New York's elite circles were surprisingly small, but the timing felt almost orchestrated by some cosmic force. "Ms. Reynolds, are you all right?" Claire's concerned voice pulled her back to the present. "I'm fine," Eliza replied automatically. "Please ask May to join me in 20 minutes instead, and clear my evening schedule. I need to speak with my sons tonight." After Claire left, Eliza highlighted Arthur's name with a red marker, her hand steady despite the emotional turbulence beneath her composed exterior. For years, she had imagined this confrontation, rehearsed it in her mind during sleepless nights. Now that it loomed just days away, she felt strangely calm, a clarity born of absolute certainty in her position. That evening, Eliza stood on the terrace of their Soho penthouse, a glass of Cabernet in hand, watching the sunset paint Manhattan in hues of gold and crimson. The city that had once seemed so hostile to a pregnant waitress now spread before her like a conquered territory. She had not merely survived here, she had triumphed. Her reflection in the glass doors showed a woman transformed, elegant in tailored Armani, her once limp hair now styled in a sophisticated cut that cost more than she used to make in a month as a waitress. The frightened girl Arthur had dismissed no longer existed. "Mom? Is everything okay?" Christopher's voice interrupted her reverie. Her 3 sons stood in the doorway, their identical faces showing varying degrees of concern. "Come sit with me," she said, gesturing to the outdoor seating area. "There's something important we need to discuss." The boys settled around the table, instantly alert to their mother's serious tone. Eliza took a steadying breath and placed a photograph on the table, the only picture she had kept of Arthur, taken during their time at Yale. "This is Arthur Sterling," she said simply, "your biological father." The triplets leaned forward, studying the image. The resemblance was unmistakable. Their eyes, jaw, and even the slight tilt of their heads when concentrating mirrored the man in the photograph. "I've told you he chose not to be part of our lives," Eliza continued, "but I haven't shared the full story. I think you're old enough now to understand, especially since we'll be seeing him at the Metropolitan Gala this weekend." Alexander's head snapped up. "He'll be there? Does he know about us?" "He'll be there, but I don't believe he knows you exist," Eliza replied. "The business world can be surprisingly segregated, and he's never shown any interest in following my career." Eliza took another steadying breath. "When I told him I was pregnant, he asked if I was certain it was his. When I confirmed it was, he offered money for an abortion or to start over somewhere else. He said," her voice caught slightly, "he said I had nothing to offer a child in his world. That I was a girl from Connecticut without connections, without proper upbringing, without refinement." The boys listened in stunned silence as their mother recounted the full story of their origin. Arthur's cruel dismissal, his assertion that they would be a generational mistake, the security guards escorting her from his office. Christopher's expression hardened into analytical coldness. His assessment was clearly flawed. Statistically speaking, your success without his assistance proves the fundamental error in his reasoning. Alexander's eyes had filled with tears. He never wanted to know us? Not even once in 15 years? William, ever the pragmatist, was already calculating implications. His company is failing while ours thrives. That creates an interesting dynamic for our potential meeting. Eliza reached out, taking each of their hands in turn. "He chose a life without you. That reflects his character, not your value. You 3 are extraordinary, not because of his DNA, but because of your own brilliance and hard work." "What's the plan, Mom?" William asked, already focusing on practical matters. "At the gala, do we acknowledge him? Avoid him? Introduce ourselves?" "We don't hide," Eliza said firmly. "We don't seek him out, but we don't avoid him either. If an introduction happens, we'll handle it with dignity. The dignity he couldn't show us 15 years ago." Across Manhattan, in the considerably less impressive headquarters of Sterling Industries, Arthur Sterling paced his office, tie loosened, hair disheveled. The company his grandfather had founded and his father had expanded was hemorrhaging value under his leadership. The SEC investigation into accounting irregularities threatened not just the company, but potentially his freedom. "Mr. Sterling, your ex-wife's attorney called again about the missed alimony payment," his assistant reported from the doorway, "and the invitation to the Metropolitan Gala was confirmed. Your table will be near the stage." Arthur waved dismissively. "Who's receiving the Entrepreneur Award this year? Someone I should know?" "Eliza Reynolds of Triplicity Tech," the assistant replied, consulting her tablet. "They're the data prediction company that's revolutionizing multiple industries. Their stock is up 42% this quarter alone." "Reynolds?" Arthur frowned. "Never heard of her. Probably another of these overvalued tech startups with more hype than substance." The assistant hesitated. "Actually, sir, they rejected acquisition offers from Google and Microsoft last year. The founder started with an algorithm she developed while working from home, apparently. It's quite an impressive story. "Spare me the rags to riches fairy tales," Arthur snapped. "Find out if Montgomery from First National will be attending. We need that loan extension." The night before the gala, Eliza stood in her dressing room, the Versace gown she'd selected hanging nearby. The deep blue fabric, almost the exact shade of her son's eyes, would make a statement without appearing to try too hard. Beside it hung 3 perfectly tailored tuxedos, identical except for the subtle differences in their bow ties. In the living room, she found the boys engaged in a final rehearsal of possible scenarios. "If he approaches us first?" Eliza asked. "Polite acknowledgement without enthusiasm," Christopher replied. "If he pretends not to recognize you? Continue the conversation as if his opinion is irrelevant, because it is," Alexander said with newfound confidence. "If he attempts to establish some claim on us now that we're successful," William's answer was immediate. "We thank him for his genetic contribution and remind him that family is built on presence, not DNA." Eliza smiled, pride overwhelming any lingering anxiety. "Perfect. Remember, with dignity, always with dignity." As she adjusted the triplets' identical bow ties the next morning, Eliza couldn't imagine that the coming 24 hours would transform not only Arthur Sterling's life, but also redefine forever the meaning of power, redemption, and justice in her own journey. As she adjusted the triplets' identical bow ties the next morning, Eliza felt a strange calm settle over her. The nervous energy that had kept her awake most of the night had transformed into a steady resolve. Tonight was not about revenge, it was about closure. "Remember," she said, straightening William's lapel, "we are exactly who we're meant to be." The Metropolitan Museum of Art glowed against the evening sky, its classical facade illuminated by strategic lighting. A red carpet extended from the curb to the grand entrance, flanked by photographers and journalists eager to capture the arrival of New York's elite. Limousines formed an elegant queue, each disgorging impeccably dressed passengers who paused briefly for photographs before ascending the museum steps. Arthur Sterling arrived early, his silver-threaded hair freshly cut, his tuxedo expensively tailored to disguise his slight paunch. Despite his polished appearance, tension lined his face as he worked the pre-event reception, moving from group to group with practiced charm that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Arthur!" called Henry Blackwood, CEO of First National Bank. "Heard anything from the SEC this week?" Arthur forced a laugh. "Just routine inquiries. Nothing to concern our investors." He accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, scanning the room for potential financial lifelines. Sterling Industries needed an immediate cash infusion to offset mounting debt. Tonight's connections could mean survival or collapse. Outside, the Reynolds limousine glided to a stop at the designated arrival point. Camera flashes intensified as the door opened. Eliza emerged first, the deep blue Versace gown catching the light, making her appear to be emerging from a sapphire sea. Her once mousy hair now fell in elegant waves, styled by Manhattan's most sought-after stylist. The frightened, exhausted girl who had once stood trembling in Arthur's office had vanished completely. The triplets followed, 3 identical young men in perfectly fitted tuxedos, their sterling blue eyes causing an immediate stir among the photographers who recognized genetic jackpots when they saw them. "Ms. Reynolds, over here!" called a photographer from the Wall Street Journal. "A moment with your sons, please." Eliza positioned herself with practiced ease, one hand resting lightly on Christopher's shoulder as the triplets arranged themselves beside her. The flashes captured the image that would dominate business sections the next morning, the tech visionary and her extraordinary sons, the embodiment of American success built on pure talent rather than inherited privilege. "Shall we?" Eliza said to the boys, moving toward the entrance with the confident stride of someone who belonged. Inside the grand hall, Arthur was mid-conversation with a potential investor when the museum's sound system crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome Eliza Reynolds, founder and CEO of Triplicity Tech, accompanied by her sons, Christopher, astrophysics scholar at Harvard at just 15 years of age, Alexander, violin prodigy already contracted with the New York Philharmonic, and William, champion of the National Mathematics Olympiad. Arthur's champagne flute paused halfway to his lips as he turned toward the entrance. The name hadn't registered immediately, Reynolds was common enough, but something in the announcement triggered a distant memory. Then he saw her. The transformation was so complete that for a moment he didn't recognize the woman he had once dismissed so cruelly. But the three young men at her side, their faces, their bearing, those unmistakable eyes, caused his hand to tremble violently. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a crash that drew nearby attention. "Arthur, are you all right?" asked his companion, noticing his sudden pallor. But Arthur couldn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the triplets, perfect copies of himself at 15, with the same aristocratic features that generations of Sterlings had carried. The truth hit him with physical force. These weren't just random boys who resembled him. These were his sons, sons he had rejected before they were even born. "Excuse me," he mumbled, backing away from the spreading puddle of champagne and broken glass. Across the room, Eliza moved with deliberate grace, acknowledging greetings from senators, CEOs, and celebrities who approached to congratulate her on the upcoming award. The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg journalists hovered nearby, competing for a moment of her time. The Triplicity just closed a $1.2 billion contract with the federal government to implement their predictive analysis system in the Defense Department, Arthur overheard someone saying. They rejected 3 acquisition offers this year, including one from Google. Arthur desperately tried to compose himself, adjusting his tie and wiping sweat from his forehead. Should he approach her? Pretend he hadn't noticed? Before he could decide, he looked up to find Eliza's eyes locked with his across the crowded room. 15 years evaporated in that single glance. There was no surprise in her expression, only a brief pause, a slight stiffening of her shoulders before she leaned over to whisper something to the tallest boy, who nodded and continued his conversation with a Princeton professor. Arthur watched, paralyzed, as Eliza made her way toward him with measured steps. The crowd seemed to part instinctively for her. "Arthur Sterling," she said when she reached him, her voice calm and controlled. "What a coincidence finding you here." "Eliza," he managed to say, his mouth suddenly dry. "You look different." 15 years will do that to a person," she replied, a polite smile on her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "I've heard about the problems at Sterling Industries. Unfortunate. Transitional phase," he defended, stiffening his posture. "And those young men with you." "My sons," she answered simply. "Our sons, technically speaking, though you abdicated that title the moment you had me escorted from your office." Arthur paled further. "Eliza, I didn't know they would be triplets. If I had known—" "What? You would have offered 3 checks instead of 1? She interrupted, still maintaining her social smile while several curious glances turned their way. "Don't worry. Your abandonment was the best thing that happened to us. I doubt we would have achieved so much with you present." One of the triplets, Arthur couldn't tell which, approached them. "Mom, Senator Johnston would like to discuss the Triplicity expansion to Washington before your speech." "Thank you, William. I'll be right there," Eliza responded, before turning back to Arthur. "This is William, mathematics specialist. Christopher is discussing his next research project with Princeton's dean, and Alexander is probably talking about his next performance with the Philharmonic conductor." William looked curiously at Arthur, extending his hand politely. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. You seem familiar." "William, this is Arthur Sterling, a former acquaintance," Eliza introduced. "Mr. Sterling, this is William Reynolds, my son." Arthur shook the teenager's hand, noting the surprising strength in the young man's grip. His own eyes stared back at him, inquisitive and bright. "Mr. Sterling? Of Sterling Industries?" William asked, his professional interest evident. "I read about your company in the Wall Street Journal. Your shares dropped 47% this year, correct? I developed an algorithm that predicted this collapse 3 years ago as part of my science fair project." Arthur choked slightly while Eliza suppressed a smile. "Mother," William continued, "didn't Triplicity reject an acquisition offer from Sterling Industries last year? I believe the offered value was insufficient, wasn't it?" "Yes, dear. It was approximately 1/10 of our current market value," Eliza replied casually, a proposal that didn't merit serious consideration. The blow was precise and devastating. Arthur realized in that moment that Eliza had known exactly who would be at the event and had come prepared for this encounter. "If you'll excuse us," Eliza said, "I need to prepare for my acceptance speech." As she walked away with William, Arthur noticed the looks and whispers around him. The story was already beginning to circulate through the hall. The powerful Arthur Sterling, the man who had abandoned a pregnant woman years ago, now facing the humiliation of seeing her more successful than he had ever been. While Eliza moved confidently through the crowd, her sons by her side, Arthur slipped to the edges of the room, seeking shadows to hide the wreckage of his pride. While Eliza moved confidently through the crowd, her sons by her side, Arthur slipped to the edges of the room, seeking shadows to hide the wreckage of his pride. The evening that had begun as a networking opportunity had transformed into a nightmare from which he couldn't awaken. Morning arrived with merciless clarity. Arthur Sterling's penthouse in the Upper East Side, once a sanctuary of privilege, felt suffocating as he reached for his phone. The screen blazed with notifications, missed calls from board members, text messages from his lawyer, and news alerts that made his stomach clench. The New York Times headline glared accusingly, "Abandonment and Redemption, the untold story behind the Triplicity empire." Below it stretched a meticulously researched exposé, complete with side-by-side photographs of Arthur and the triplets, the genetic resemblance undeniable and damning. Arthur's hands trembled as he scrolled through the article, which detailed how he had abandoned a pregnant Eliza 15 years earlier, and how she had built a technological empire while raising their sons, now national prodigies, entirely on her own. A quote from an anonymous Yale classmate who had witnessed their relationship: "He treated her like a temporary amusement, despite her obvious brilliance. When she needed him most, he discarded her." His phone rang. Helena Rothschild, the oldest and most respected member of Sterling Industries' board of directors. Arthur considered ignoring it, but desperation overrode his instinct for avoidance. "Helena," he answered, attempting a confident tone that fell embarrassingly flat. "Emergency board meeting, 9 o'clock, she replied, her normally measured voice taut with fury. "My office, not the conference room. We don't need staff witnessing this conversation." 45 minutes later, Arthur entered the elegant corner office where Helena had served as director for over 20 years. The entire board was already seated, copies of the New York Times spread before them. The atmosphere crackled with collective judgment. "Arthur, is this true?" Helena demanded, throwing the newspaper across her desk. "You abandoned a woman pregnant with your children who are now recognized as prodigies across the country." "It's complicated, Helena," Arthur began, his rehearsed explanation withering under 7 pairs of condemning eyes. "I was young, pressured by my father—" "Save your justifications," interrupted Marcus Chen, the newest board member. "The stock has dropped 12% this morning alone. Investors are calling us furious. We have 3 major family investment funds with strong family values threatening to withdraw support." "The SEC investigation was problematic enough," added Richard Blackwell, examining Arthur with newfound disgust. "But this reveals a character deficit that makes us question every decision you've ever made for this company." "Your father built Sterling Industries on integrity." Helena said, her disappointment perhaps the most cutting. What would he say if he were still alive? Arthur's phone vibrated in his pocket. Glancing down, he saw his third wife's name on the screen. Stepping out of the meeting for a moment, he answered. "Arthur, your things are in the lobby." Vanessa's voice was cold, controlled. "I've instructed security not to allow you upstairs. My lawyers will contact yours regarding divorce proceedings." Vanessa, we can discuss." "There's nothing to discuss. I've spent 3 years defending you to my friends, claiming the rumors about your business practices were exaggerated. But this? Abandoning your own children? Calling them a generational mistake? I won't be associated with such cruelty." The line went dead. Arthur leaned against the wall, the triple blows of public exposure, board condemnation, and marital collapse leaving him physically unsteady. Across Manhattan in the gleaming Triplicity Tower, Eliza faced her own challenges. The triplets, now fully aware of their father's identity and the circumstances of his rejection, processed the information in their distinctly individual ways. The statistical probability of him attempting contact now is 97%, Christopher observed, analyzing the situation with his characteristic detachment. His company's valuation has decreased by 43% in 18 months. We represent potential social and financial capital he previously discarded. Alexander paced the office, emotion radiating from him in waves. How could he say those things about us? About you? We hadn't even been born yet. His assessment was fundamentally flawed, William noted, scrolling through Sterling Industries' quarterly reports on his tablet. If we evaluate based on objective metrics of success, Mother's trajectory has been exponentially superior to his. His rejection was ultimately advantageous to our development. Eliza watched her sons with a mixture of pride and concern. "This exposure wasn't my intention," she admitted. "I expected a private encounter, not public revelation." "Are you worried about the company's image?" Christopher asked. "No," Eliza replied firmly. "I'm worried about you three. This spotlight wasn't something you chose." "We're fine, Mom," Alexander assured her, his initial hurt transforming into resolve. "We've always known who we are. Finding out who he is doesn't change that." The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Reynolds, Arthur Sterling on line 2. It's his 5th call today." Eliza exchanged glances with her sons, a silent question passing between them. After a moment of collective consideration, she nodded. "Put him through on speakerphone, please." The line clicked, and Arthur's voice filled the room, a desperate quality evident in every syllable. "Eliza, we need to talk," he pleaded, unaware of the audience listening. "About the boys, about us, about everything." "There is no us, Arthur," she replied calmly. "There never was, according to your own words. Things have changed. I made a terrible mistake. I want to know my sons, make up for lost time," he implored. "I still have resources, connections." "Connections?" Eliza laughed softly. "My sons already have more meaningful connections at 15 than you've built in your entire life. Christopher dines with Nobel laureates. Alexander performs for presidents. William mentors young mathematicians at MIT. I can offer the Sterling name," Arthur attempted, "the family legacy." "A name associated with a company on the brink of bankruptcy?" Eliza interrupted. "Arthur, the Reynolds surname already carries more weight at every charity event in this city than Sterling ever will again. Our Foundation for Single Mothers has already helped over 5,000 women start their own businesses." Silence stretched from the other end of the line. "I'm not doing this out of vengeance, Arthur," Eliza continued, her tone softening slightly. "We simply don't need you. We never did. You made your decision 15 years ago, and we built our lives around it. Respect at least that." Christopher stepped forward toward the speakerphone. "Mr. Sterling, this is Christopher Reynolds. If you wish to know us, it will have to be on our terms, not through some belated sense of ownership or paternal right. Beginning with respect for our mother and what she's built." Alexander and William nodded silently in agreement. As Eliza ended the call, her assistant appeared at the door. "Ms. Reynolds, the Wall Street Journal is requesting comment on rumors that Triplicity is considering acquiring Sterling Industries' technology division." Eliza glanced at her sons, a slight smile forming. "Tell them we don't comment on acquisition rumors, yet." The desperate voice of Arthur Sterling on the phone, the Wall Street Journal's inquiry, and the triplets' unified stance marked the beginning of a chapter none of them had anticipated, not in headlines or boardrooms, but in the complex renegotiation of a family narrative 15 years in the making. 2 weeks after the media explosion surrounding the Reynolds-Sterling connection, the business world buzzed with the announcement that shocked Wall Street. Triplicity Tech acquires Sterling Industries' technology division. The transaction, valued at $780 million, represented less than a fifth of Triplicity's total value, but more than half of what remained of the once mighty Sterling empire. In the Triplicity Tower's sleek conference room, Eliza adjusted her Chanel suit, reviewing the final acquisition documents before the signing ceremony. The past fortnight had been a whirlwind of negotiations, due diligence, and strategic planning. What had begun as a rumor had crystallized into a business decision that made perfect sense. Sterling's technology division had valuable patents and talented engineers, suffocating under poor leadership and outdated vision. "Ms. Reynolds, the press is assembled in the main conference room," her assistant announced. "Mr. Sterling has arrived." Eliza nodded, gathering her files. "Thank you, Claire. I'll be there in 5 minutes." The press conference proceeded with clinical precision. Cameras flashed as Eliza explained the acquisition's strategic value, her voice steady and professional. A reporter from the Financial Times raised his hand. "Ms. Reynolds, does this acquisition have any connection to the recent revelations about your personal history with Arthur Sterling?" Eliza smiled serenely, anticipating the question. "Business is business. Triplicity always acquires companies with underutilized potential. It's what we do, identify value where others fail to see it." Her choice of words wasn't lost on Arthur, who sat at the edge of the stage, his once commanding presence diminished by recent events. The SEC investigation into Sterling Industries had intensified, his third wife had filed for divorce, and major investors were abandoning ship. The man who had once dismissed Eliza as having nothing to offer now watched as she commandeered the press conference with effortless authority. Later that afternoon, in the signature ceremony, Eliza signed the final acquisition documents. Across the table, Arthur Sterling, now merely a minority shareholder in the company his father had built, observed the woman he had once considered inadequate command, a room full of attorneys and executives with natural authority. When everyone filed out, leaving them momentarily alone, Arthur finally asked the question that had haunted him for 2 weeks. "How did you do it, Eliza? How did you build all this alone?" She looked at him with something approaching compassion. "I was never truly alone, Arthur. I had 3 reasons to get up every morning and fight. 3 reasons to be extraordinary. You could have been part of that." "And now?" His voice held a vulnerability she had never heard before. "Now you're a minority investor in one of our subsidiaries," she replied, closing her portfolio. "The boys have agreed to lunch with you next month, with no promises beyond that. As for me, I'm moving forward, as I always have." The request for lunch had been the triplets' idea, a carefully considered decision reached after days of family discussion. Christopher had analyzed the statistical value of establishing baseline familiarity with their biological father. Alexander had expressed curiosity about their genetic heritage, particularly regarding his musical abilities. William had pragmatically noted that regardless of past actions, biological connections could provide useful medical history. The lunch took place at a private dining room in the Four Seasons, neutral territory with sufficient privacy. Arthur arrived 20 minutes early, nervously adjusting his tie and repeatedly checking his reflection in his phone's screen. When the maitre d' opened the door to admit Eliza and the triplets, Arthur stood so quickly he nearly knocked over his water glass. 3 identical young men in perfectly tailored suits entered, their posture and confidence light years beyond what Arthur had possessed at their age. The family resemblance was undeniable. Beyond the famous sterling sapphire eyes, they carried themselves with the same tilt of the head, the same analytical gaze. "Thank you for coming," Arthur said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. The initial moments passed in awkward exchanges. Water poured, menus consulted, perfunctory comments about the weather. Then Christopher, ever the analyst, broke the impasse. "Why did you decide we weren't worth your time 15 years ago, Mr. Sterling?" The directness of the question silenced the table. Arthur set down his water glass, for once choosing honesty over self-preservation. "Because of fear, selfishness, a distorted definition of success I inherited from my father." "Did you ever regret it?" Alexander asked, his emotional intelligence seeking authentic connection. "Before discovering who we became, did you ever wonder about us?" Arthur stared at his plate. "Yes, but not enough to act on it. That's the truth." William, practical as always, leaned forward. "Your recent actions seem motivated by our success, not genuine paternal interest." "Initially, perhaps," Arthur admitted. "Seeing 3 extraordinary young men who are clearly Sterlings, it was shocking. But sitting here now, I realize what I've truly lost isn't potential allies or connections. It's 15 years of knowing you." The lunch concluded without dramatic resolutions or tearful reconciliations, merely a tentative agreement for occasional contact, strictly on the triplets' terms. As they left, Arthur watched the easy intimacy between Eliza and their sons, the product of 15 years of shared struggles and triumphs that he could never recover. On the day of the final acquisition signing, Triplicity's executive floor buzzed with activity. Lawyers from both companies reviewed documents while financial officers verified final numbers. Arthur entered the conference room, now acutely aware that he was a visitor in the empire Eliza had built. The signing proceeded methodically, each signature transferring more control from Sterling to Triplicity. When the final document received its last signature, polite applause rippled through the room. As executives and attorneys filed out to the celebratory reception, Eliza and Arthur found themselves alone in the conference room. "So this is it," Arthur said, looking around at what had once been his industry dominance, now transferred to the woman he had dismissed so thoroughly. "This is it," Eliza confirmed, gathering her papers. "The technology division will be integrated into our development sector. Your remaining board position ensures you'll be kept informed of major decisions." Arthur shook his head slowly, still processing the magnitude of the role reversal. "When you left my office that day, I never imagined—" "How did you do it, Eliza? How did you build all this alone?" Eliza paused, really looking at him for the first time. The arrogant young executive had been replaced by a middle-aged man bearing the consequences of his choices. For a moment, she felt not triumph but a strange sadness for all that might have been. "I was never truly alone, Arthur. I had 3 reasons to get up every morning and fight. 3 reasons to be extraordinary. You could have been part of that. And now? Now you're a minority investor in one of our subsidiaries," she replied, closing her portfolio. "The boys have agreed to lunch with you next month with no promises beyond that. As for me, I'm moving forward as I always have." As Eliza left the Triplicity building, her 3 sons waited in the limousine. Christopher studied complex equations on his tablet, Alexander mentally fine-tuned a composition, and William analyzed the Foundation's latest report. "How was it?" William asked. "A chapter closed," Eliza responded, entering the vehicle. "Now let's focus on what matters. Christopher, don't forget the video conference with Cambridge at 8. Alexander, your Carnegie Hall presentation has been moved to Friday. And William, we need to review the scholarship program expansion." As the limousine pulled away from the financial district, Arthur Sterling watched from the window of his former office, now bearing the Triplicity logo on the door. He realized finally that he had lost much more than a family that winter afternoon 15 years ago. He had lost the chance to be part of something truly extraordinary, not built with inherited privilege, but with unwavering determination and genuine love. Eliza Reynolds, the worthless girl from Connecticut, had become not just his equal but something he could never achieve, complete, fulfilled, and truly free. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.